From the headquarters of Telesur English in Caracas, Venezuela, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. Several bilateral agreements have been signed in Pyongyang between the two Koreas following their summit on Wednesday. Footage shows the two leaders signing the agreement at the State Guest House. The first session of the talks, which lasted for 2 hours, was held at the headquarters of the North Korea's ruling Workers' Party Central Committee. The two Koreas agreed that the peninsula should turn into a land of peace.
We adopted a military pact to end a history of brutal, tragic confrontation and hostility, and agreed to make efforts to turn the peninsula into a land of peace without nuclear weapons and nuclear threats.
South and North Korea agreed on a denuclearization plan for the first time. It's a very magnificent outcome. The North has decided to permanently abolish the Tonchanri gene test site and missile launchers with the attendance of experts from relevant countries.
The leaders of the two Koreas began their meeting with a grand musical concert. South Korean President Moon Jae-in was welcomed by a cheering crowd at the Grand Theater for Art. North Korea's Kim Jong-un and his wife Ri So-yu also enjoyed the performance. And local residents of Pyongyang took the opportunity to display their collective farming, where rice and vegetables are grown. Children danced and sang as parents worked on the farm. The song lyrics speak about leading a healthy lifestyle and loyalty to the nation. Food production is of particular importance in North Korea, as the country has faced harsh sanctions by the United States. Now to Venezuela, where the latest group of migrants has arrived back in Caracas from Lima, Peru. The group of 90 Venezuelan citizens touched down a few hours ago as part of the Venezuelan government's plan, the return to the homeland. Some of them said they had suffered xenophobia abroad. Others just said they hadn't been able to find a job and that life was too expensive. Over 3,000 Venezuelans have now chosen to return home under this program. Our correspondent Luis Tavera brings us the details from Caracas.
The Back to the Homeland plan has reached 3,000 Venezuelans. Through this plan, the government seeks to respect the sovereign rights of the citizens, many of whom have reported xenophobia and abuses, including labor exploitation. On Tuesday evening, 90 Venezuelans were incorporated into the plan just before coming from Peru. They claimed to have experienced labor exploitation and rejection, and lack of access to things like medicine, education, and access to decent works. In terms of labor exploitation, they worked extensive hours and the wages were not dignified or sufficient for the long working days, which at times reaches more than 12 hours per day subjected. The government is retaining this aerial bridge in order to repatriate Venezuelans to plan as already reaches 8 countries and will remain active during the coming days to continue paying respect and affording rights and sovereignty to Venezuelans who've gone abroad, according to the government.
That was Luis Tavera from Caracas. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro says that intelligence services knew of a plan to try to oust him from power. According to Maduro, it was meant to prevent his re-election.
Of course, we knew about the conspiracy. It was the Bolivarian government that discovered this conspiracy. The conspirators and arrested them. It was the armed forces that arrested them and imprisoned them. The counterintelligence organizations of Venezuela. Of course, Rick, we knew about it. I said, Rick, in all the campaign, come lightning or thunder, there will be elections. Whoever comes out, we were ready for the elections and for the people to exercise their right to vote. If such a group had come out, probably even more people would have come out and voted, because nobody wants anyone to intervene and try and undermine Venezuelan democracy.
President Maduro also talked about his recent visit to China, where he signed 28 cooperation agreements. These include several that could double Venezuela's oil production in the next year.
We have not only sold 9.9% of the shares, so that the Chinese company gets to 49% of the joint venture in line with our hydrocarbons law, but a series of other investments, as I propose to the Chinese side, to get to 1 million barrels of oil a day for China. I calculate that in all we will invest approximately $5 billion together with China in the course of the year.
The United States has imposed new tariffs on Chinese imports starting next week. The new tariffs are worth $200 billion US. Donald Trump's administration is also threatening to target even more Chinese products if Beijing retaliates. The Chinese government has said it would impose tariffs on US goods worth $60 billion in response to the move.
We'll see what happens as to whether or not we're able to do something, in particular with China. That's a big one, because the losses have been staggering for so many years for our country, and we just can't let that happen anymore.
More stories coming up. We'll be back. Welcome back. On Tuesday, the Congress of South African Trade Unions reached its second day. The General Secretary of the South African Communist Party, Blade Simande, lamented the state of the South African economy. He said state revenue is under severe pressure and that debt, class inequalities, unemployment and poverty levels also remain high.
The country needs a very strong COSATU, even more so now, when we are faced with the many challenges that we have, like the ones I started with when I was opening my speech. Problems of poverty, unemployment, the issue of young people and drugs and substance abuse. Because COSATU is a trade union federation, but its voice and organizational muscle is very important in terms of building a better South Africa. So that is why this Congress is very important. But also this Congress is important just for purposes of building a stronger COSATU itself.
Brian Malanga from Moja Media was there and gives us the details from the conference.
Top of the agenda today was once again that topic that I introduced yesterday, the issue and the notion of gender equality. And it is interesting to note that as we have and as the Congress has this conversation around gender equality, the conversation is around saying no to unfair treatment, no to to discrimination, and it is even brought into the whole conversation and debate what we might consider as sexual minorities, and this is the LGBTIQ community. And it's very important to note that the 13th conference is actually saying there will no longer be tolerated any form and shape of any discrimination within the Congress, within the Federation, and within all of its alliance partners. Then connected to that is the whole notion of empowerment of women. And we saw that very clearly today, where we have one female candidate who went unopposed and who's going unopposed in this battle for leadership. She is the first, she's going to be the first in South Africa. She's also going to be the first on the continent who is going to be the head of a trade union federation.
Brian Malanga from Johannesburg. South Africa's top court has ruled that cannabis for private and personal use is legal. In a high-profile case that divided the court, a ruling finally came down saying that the law banning the use of cannabis is unconstitutional and invalid. Justice Raymond Sondo delivered the unanimous verdict in Johannesburg. Police in Eswatini have clashed with protesting workers. Police in the city of Mancini used rubber bullets and tear gas to disperse the protesters. The workers, allied to the Trade Union Congress of Swaziland, have been protesting on the streets of the nation's major towns, demanding higher wages and better working conditions. At least 5 workers have reportedly been hospitalized after enduring rubber bullet injuries. A Ugandan warlord claims he was brutalized as a child and is a former victim himself. Dominic Ongwen faces 70 charges at the International Court of Justice for being part of the Lord's Resistance Army, which terrorized Uganda under Joseph Kony. Ongwen's lawyers say he should be acquitted of his crimes since he was also a victim. He was kidnapped as a child and turned into a soldier by the LRA. Around 60 girls in Burkina Faso have been hospitalized from female genital mutilation. Victims suffer from heavy blood loss and infections. The practice continues despite being outlawed in 1996. The first African freestyle football championship has taken place in Nigeria. Ivory Coast player Ben Abdul Nader Kone has won the tournament. The participants from 20 countries of the continent have amazed the audience in the city of Lagos with their moves, tricks, and skills. The event was also aimed at empowering the youth spirit. The United Nations has said that Myanmar's democratic transition is at a standstill because authorities seek to silence critics. On the other hand, hate speech against Muslim Rohingyas is rampant, according to the UN. The UN fact-finding team found that Myanmar's military carried out mass killings and gang rapes of Rohingya with genocidal intent last year. The panel also called for the commander-in-chief and 5 generals to be prosecuted for the crimes under international law.
Repressive laws are being used to silence those that seek to scrutinize. We have verified instances of reprisals against individuals for sharing information with the United Nations. Peaceful protests are blocked, sometimes violently, as occurred in the village of Mrauku, while voices critical of the government are muted by threats and arrest. Hate speech is thriving, particularly against the Rohingya.
Former Ecuadorian Foreign Minister Guillaume Long warned the UN's Human Rights Council of the crumbling rule of law in the country. Long addressed the council in Geneva, Switzerland, to highlight the recent events that violate the rule of law in Ecuador. He stated that measures are being instituted to persecute the opposition, including former President Rafael Correa. According to Long, this is just another example of lawfare that's being used across Latin America.
Until a few months ago, I represented Ecuador in this very council. Today, as a civilian, I've come to call out the collapse of Ecuador's state of law. Our government has disbanded the Constitutional Court, and many other judicial bodies have been directly intervened by political interests, violating the constitution in order to persecute opposition leaders. In particular, former President Rafael Correa and officials from his administration. What is happening in Ecuador is the politicizing of justice, what is known as lawfare, and which we can see all across Latin America. I ask this council to call on the Ecuadorian government to put an end to political persecutions and to avoid any repercussions my speech today may bring.
Israeli police have come under fire for carrying out an attack on Palestinian worshippers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem on Tuesday. Hundreds of Jews reportedly provoked staff and worshippers at the holy compound. Nayara Tardo, our correspondent in Egypt, has more.
It all took place at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in the occupied city of Jerusalem. It is one of the 3 most important mosques for Islam, and according to the Muslim tradition, the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven from this place in the year 621, thus making it a sacred place for Muslims. Therefore, existing rules establish that non-Muslims may enter the place during the established hours for the visit, but they are not allowed to perform any religious rites. However, today dozens of Jewish fanatics entered the mosque and tried to celebrate Jewish rituals that are against the permanent orders, which provoked a confrontation between the Israelis and the Palestinians. According to the Palestinian authorities, the Israeli police assaulted all Palestinians present in the mosque, including guards who are also Palestinian. They detained 5 people and 4 required hospitalization. Yom Kippur begins this Tuesday, also known as the Day of the Atonement. This is a sacred celebration that begins on Tuesday evening and ends on the Wednesday at sundown. Therefore, the Jewish right-wing group asked the followers to intensify their presence within the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex to take over it and to build a Jewish temple in place of the Muslim mosque. Let us remember that Jerusalem is one of the cities occupied by the Israelis, who intend to take control of that city completely to make it a definitively the capital of Israel. Stay with us for more developments.
That was Nayara Tardo, our correspondent. We'll take one last short break, but stay with us for more news from Latin America. Thanks for joining us again. Former Argentinian President Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner has appeared in court for a 3rd hearing. A judge has requested her immunity as a senator be lifted so she can be detained. She is accused of taking part in an alleged bribery network during her presidency. Fernandez has denied any wrongdoing. Many believe this is another example of the political persecution of a progressive Latin American leader. Fernandez supporters gather outside the court in Buenos Aires. They say the current government is using Fernandez's case to distract attention from the country's economic crisis. They defend Fernandez as one of the leaders who work towards bringing social justice in the country.
This is all a circus. They broke her hip because they obviously want to cover up their drugs.
They are covering up everything. President Mauricio Macri is firing many people. There are more layoffs now in Argentina, more poverty.
Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Edgardo Esteban, has the latest.
The former president, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, arrived at the court of Dr. Sebastián Casanelo because of the so-called notebook scandal. She registered her statement at the court and said that she's being attacked and persecuted for the last 2 years and 9 months. She also said that she's being harassed by the judicial system by being asked to appear in court even when there isn't substantial evidence against her. There has been a lot of commotion in the political circle after the request made by Judge Claudio Bonadío regarding the management of funds by under her administration. Until now, the only evidence the court has is the photocopy of the notebook entries, but the original notebook has not been produced in the court. The investigating team has been looking for containers full of money in Patagonia, but so far they haven't found anything. Cristina Fernandez has said that they can look all over Patagonia and they won't find anything. On the other hand, the popular support on social media has been really surprising for her. And the polls say that if there was an election today, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner would win by large margins in comparison to Mauricio Macri. Social movements and human rights organizations claim that all this is to deviate the attention from the economic crisis of the country and to focus on Cristina Fernandez, similar to what is happening in Brazil with Lula da Silva.
Now to Brazil, where according to the Electoral Court, former President Dilma Rousseff can be a candidate for the Senate. With 4 votes in favor and 3 against, a court in Minas Gerais, in the southeastern of the country, decided to authorize her registration. By doing so, the court dismissed petitions that claimed Rousseff lost her political rights after being impeached in 2016. Such a ruling would have instead banned her from politics for 8 years. Rousseff celebrated the decision on Twitter. Just 3 weeks to Brazil's presidential elections, and the support for Workers' Party candidate Fernando Haddad has sharply grown in the latest poll. Haddad, who replaced imprisoned former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, had 17.6% of voter intentions in the first polling. That places Haddad just behind right-wing Jair Bolsonaro, who took 28.2% of voter support. After meeting with Lula at the federal police headquarters in Curitiba, Haddad said polls are an important portrait of the electoral scenario, emphasizing that there is a lot of work to be done. U.S. intellectual and activist Noam Chomsky weighed in on the complex situation of Brazil and the region. Chomsky heavily criticized U.S. military intervention in South America. While in Sao Paulo, Chomsky highlighted significant achievements of the government of Lula da Silva on both domestic and geopolitical fronts. He also denounced any U.S. military intervention in Latin America, especially the ongoing siege against Venezuela.
For the sake of freedom and democracy in Brazil, Lula should be freed to run in the presidential election, and presumably will win the election. He's had an admirable record and can propel Brazil back to the position in the center of the world stage that was in fact achieved with Lula's actions, along with his foreign minister, Celso Amorim, with impressive domestic achievements as well. Those days can return, and freeing Lula is the first step towards them.
Award-winning U.S. film director Oliver Stone harshly criticized what he described as the systematic assassination of Colombian social leaders. He was speaking during a press conference at the recent Smart Films Festival held in Colombia.
I've heard alarming reports from many sides now about the paramilitaries in Colombia going about the old business of killing people, killing Colombian reformers, unionists, reformers, teachers.
In Costa Rica, marches continue against the tax reform bill proposed by the government. During the second week of the union-led strike, fears of fuel shortages caused long lines at gas stations. Many roads in the country's interior remained blocked, mainly in the province of Limón, where union led fresh protests on Tuesday. People in Costa Rica are asking for tighter controls on borders. But human rights defenders are worried that this could fuel discrimination in the country.
Violent protests took over the streets of San Jose. Xenophobic groups are asking that borders be controlled and that the government stop receiving migrants. They say their concerns are over jobs and safety.
We are not against foreigners or immigrants. We are not xenophobic or racist, but we are against crime and criminals.
We are against people coming to steal. We have enough criminals as it is. Now we have to burden ourselves with other countries' problems.
They are irresponsibly letting people in when our unemployment rate is already at 10.5%. It's against common sense to receive so many people when our economic situation is so poor.
Even mayors of border towns have asked for higher control.
We care about border control. We need more manpower. We live in peace with our neighbors, but we must lawfully protect our borders.
Human rights defenders are worried about the rise in xenophobic discourse, something which hadn't been seen before in the country at such a large scale.
The violent discourse is becoming noticeable on a physical level. In the last protests we had in San Jose, some Costa Ricans actually attacked a group of foreigners.
Protests against migrants on the streets, in social media, and even by some authorities are not being recognized by migration services, who proclaim that xenophobic rhetoric is decreasing.
The number of pro-migrant organizations are higher than those who have attacked these groups.
Costa Rica deems itself as a multicultural country, and migration has always meant a lot for arts, education, sports, and society in general.
We've come to the end of this news brief. This and many other stories you can find on our website, telesurtv.net/English. You can also follow us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.
The ruling world order has always